Welcome to West Film. We bring you the best movie recaps, reviews, ending explained videos, and hidden details from your favorite films. If you love great movies, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now grab some popcorn, and let's jump into today's movie. They're allowed to live among humans, but only under strict rules. As long as they don't use magic to harm people, Calder leaves them alone. His job isn't to destroy every witch, it's to step in whenever the balance between the two worlds is threatened. The 36th Don is preparing to retire after 50 years of loyal service, so Calder gives him an antique pen as a farewell gift and a token of respect. During the visit, Calder also learns that his friend has already chosen his replacement, a young man who will become the 37th Don and who promises to watch over Calder from now on. After their meeting, the 36th Don takes a taxi home, unaware that a mysterious figure named Beel is watching him from a distance. The next day, Calder gets a phone call with devastating news that the 36th Don has died in his sleep. Shaken by the loss, Calder attends the ceremony where the young successor is officially marked as the 37th Don. A burning symbol is placed on his arm, completing the ritual and confirming his new role. Afterward, Calder and the new Don go to the dead man's apartment to investigate. But first, Calder checks for magical traces using his usual methods, breathing against the window, testing the room with a lighter, looking for signs of elemental magic. Nothing seems unusual, but just as he's about to leave, Calder spots 3 dead insects on the floor, and that small detail feels wrong to him. He spreads a special powder across the floor, and suddenly a hidden pentagram is revealed. Seconds later, the symbol erupts and glowing runes spread across the walls. There's no doubt now, the apartment was cursed with rare black magic, which means the 36th Don didn't die naturally, he was murdered. Calder keeps searching and realizes the antique pen he gave his friend is missing. He also finds a book marked with a bloody fingerprint, which briefly makes him suspect the new Don, but the young man quickly proves his innocence by showing Calder his badly burned hands. He explains that when he was a child, witches set his home on fire, and Calder was the one who pulled him from the flames. It's clear the new Don has his own painful history with witchcraft. The two of them then head to a local bakery and force their way into the kitchen, where strange people are preparing food with disturbing magical ingredients. Inside, they find a powerful witch named Max, who's been selling illegal magical stimulants. The moment Max realizes Calder is there, he tries to escape by transforming into a swarm of butterflies, but Calder is ready and traps the butterflies in a jar, stopping the escape. Max claims he knows nothing about anyone using dark magic, but Calder presses him hard, making it clear that lying would be a bad idea. Finally, Max admits he recently sold a forbidden herb to a stranger. Since Max is blind, he can't describe the man's face, but he remembers the smell, a mix of arsenic and rotten apples. That clue leads Calder to believe the killer may be hiding in a funeral home near an apple tree. Wanting to keep the new Don out of danger, Calder sends him home and decides to investigate alone. Meanwhile, a young boy walking down the street notices a trail of gummy bears scattered along the ground. Curious, he follows them to a bright, inviting house with a tree covered in candy-like gummies. Beel is watching silently from nearby. As the child reaches for the sweets, Calder arrives just in time to stop him, revealing that the gummies are actually rotten apples disguised by magic. As the illusion breaks, the charming house transforms into an old, decaying structure. Calder searches the place carefully and finds what looks like a frightened young girl. He approaches cautiously, but the truth comes out fast. She isn't innocent at all. She's a warlock in disguise, and his real name is Elle. The warlock suddenly turns violent, lunging at Calder and driving a blade into his hand before making a run for it. But Calder isn't an ordinary man. The wound seals itself almost instantly, and without slowing down, he chases Elle down. As the warlock tries to flee, Calder hurls a knife with perfect aim, pinning him to a wall and stopping him cold. While searching him, Calder finds the antique pen he'd given the 36th donor, confirming L's connection to the attack. Calder knocks him out and brings him before the Council of Witches. Once they arrive, the 37th Don can't hold back his anger and takes the opportunity to punch L, getting a small piece of revenge for what happened to his predecessor. The council is led by a powerful witch named Gleezer. She performs a card reading to judge L's guilt, and the cards confirm his involvement. But Calder isn't satisfied with such a simple answer. He points out that the spell used against the 36th Don was far too advanced for L to have handled alone. Someone else has to be behind him. Gleezer refuses to listen, though. Instead of investigating further, she summons a horrifying creature known as the Sentinel and feeds L to it without a trace of mercy, ending him before Calder can get more answers. As Calder watches this happen, something catches his eye, a dead insect stuck to Gleezer's clothing. That small detail sparks a new thought, and he goes back to examine the 36th Don's body more carefully. This time he uses a carved candle to test for hidden magic, and it reacts, proving some kind of spell is still present. When Calder checks the Don's neck, he finds another dead insect. That discovery changes everything. The 36th Don isn't truly dead. He's trapped under an old form of black magic, a curse designed to make him appear dead while keeping him imprisoned in a terrible state. There's only one way to break it: kill the warlock who cast it. But since L has already been destroyed, it's now clear he wasn't the true mastermind, just someone serving another master. Calder then notices a small cut on the Don's finger and, remembering the book from the apartment, goes back to examine it again. This time he realizes the bloody fingerprints weren't random, they'd been placed deliberately, forming a hidden message: remember your death. Since Calder has no clear memory of his earliest life or the moment he was cursed, he decides to seek help from someone who can unlock what's buried in his mind. He goes to a witch bar, and the moment he walks in, nearly every witch inside panics and leaves. His reputation alone is enough to empty the room. Only the owner, Chloe, stays behind. Calder asks her to perform a memory spell. Chloe is reluctant, since helping a witch hunter feels wrong to her. After all, Calder has spent centuries hunting witches, but when he explains he's trying to save an old friend, she softens and agrees. Chloe prepares the spell by placing a memory potion inside a cherry. Calder eats it, and instantly his mind is pulled backward. He finds himself back in the cursed forest from centuries ago, where he sees something disturbing: his own burned corpse, kneeling on the ground. Before he can make sense of it, Beel suddenly appears and stares him out of the vision. Calder wakes up chained to the floor. Thinking fast, he breaks his own fingers to slip his hand out of the cuffs. Once free, he goes after Beel, and the two clash in a violent fight. But Calder is still trapped between reality and the effects of the memory spell. His vision keeps twisting, and hallucinations flash before his eyes, making it hard for him to defend himself properly. Beel takes advantage of Calder's weakened state and sets the bar on fire. Chloe rushes to pull Calder out of the trance, but he's too confused to recognize her in his mind. She looks like the Witch Queen, and he nearly kills her. At the last second, she blows a powder into his face, breaking the illusion and waking him up. Calder tries to capture Beel again, but Beel opens a hole in the floor made of roots and disappears through it. Chloe grabs a fire extinguisher and tries desperately to save her bar, but the flames spread too fast, and everything she built is destroyed. Heartbroken and furious, she tells Calder that maybe everyone was right about him, maybe he really is a monster. Later that night, Chloe is alone in her apartment when she hears a strange noise. The lights burst one by one, plunging the room into darkness. Roots rip open the floor beneath her and start dragging her down, as if the earth itself is pulling her into hell. She fights with everything she has to break free. Then she sees Calder's hand reaching out to save her, but just as she grabs for it, She wakes up and realizes she's inside the cathedral. Calder and the 37th Dome have been researching Beale, trying to understand who they're dealing with. Calder asks Chloe for help again, this time appealing to her anger, telling her that helping them is the best way to get revenge for the destruction of her bar. Chloe agrees, but there's a problem. With her bar gone, she no longer has the ingredients she needs to make the potion, so she takes Calder to the home of a friend who might have what they need. When they arrive, Chloe is crushed to find her friend dead. The place has been ransacked, and all the important magical plants have been stolen. Then her dead friend's phone rings. Chloe answers, and the voice on the other end belongs to Beale, who delivers a threatening message warning that more attacks are coming. With no other options, Calder decides to visit a dangerous witch named Danique. She agrees to lend them the plants they need, but the meeting isn't as simple as it seems. While Chloe is distracted checking the ingredients, Calder suddenly begins seeing visions of his dead family. The images feel so real that he becomes completely lost in them. It turns out Danique has betrayed them. Her people grab Chloe while Calder is trapped inside the memory spell. For a brief moment, Calder is overwhelmed with happiness at seeing his family again, and he wants to stay in the illusion. But Chloe refuses to let him disappear into it, calling to him and pushing him until he finally snaps awake. Back in the real world, Calder realizes Danique's men are dragging him away. He reacts instantly, overpowering them and knocking them all down, then finds Chloe and frees her before turning his attention to Danique. Under pressure, Danique swears she doesn't know Beale's real plan. She only helped him get the plants he asked for. Calder chooses to leave without punishing her, but Chloe isn't willing to let Danique walk away untouched. As payback, she steals Danique's magical gem and destroys it. The moment the gem breaks, Danique's illusion vanishes, revealing her true, hideous face beneath the glamour. Afterward, Calder tells Chloe what he's figured out. She's a dream walker, which means she shouldn't need potions to enter someone's mind. Chloe admits she's afraid of her own power. The last time she used it, she entered her brother's mind and he died, and she's avoided using her ability ever since. Calder takes her to a sacred place where the history of witches is preserved. There he teaches her more about her own legacy and reminds her that his immortality makes him the safest person for her to practice on. Since he can't die, she can enter his mind without fearing the same outcome. With Calder guiding her, Chloe finally uses her power. Together, they return to the night of the curse. Once again, they see Calder's burned body kneeling in the forest. When his fellow hunters approach it, the corpse suddenly lets out a terrifying roar. When the first Dome attempted to destroy the Witch Queen's heart, Calder's body reacted instantly. He screamed in unbearable pain, revealing the terrible truth. If they destroyed the heart, Calder would die with it. Because of that, the heart was never destroyed. Instead, it was hidden away. Chloe quickly understands what this means. Beale didn't kill the 36th Dome randomly. He targeted him because the old Dome knew where the Queen's heart had been kept. Now Beale plans to use that heart to bring the Witch Queen back into the world. Meanwhile, Beale captures Max and takes him to the ancient woods, pinning him against a tree and preparing him as a sacrifice. With the Queen's heart in his possession, Beale begins the ritual to summon her back. Back at the cathedral, Calder is furious. He storms in and confronts the 37th Dome, demanding to know why the Axe and Cross kept the truth from him for centuries. Nobody had ever told him the Witch Queen's heart still existed. Calder feels betrayed by the very organization he's served for so long. The young Dome explains that the 36th Dome had recently been considering destroying the heart, believing it might finally free Calder from his immortal curse, even if it meant ending his life. The 37th Dome then gives Calder a useful lead. Beale's truck has been located, and they can track where he went. A short time later, Calder reaches the woods and finds Max, but something is horribly wrong. Max has been taken over by the Witch Queen. Suddenly Chloe appears behind Calder, and for a moment he's distracted. But then the illusion collapses. It was Beale tricking him. Beale attacks Calder with fire magic and follows it with gunshots, trying to finish him off. Calder reacts faster than expected and throws a knife, killing Beale before he can continue. But the momentary distraction gives the Queen the opening she needs. She drives a blade into Calder's body and pulls the immortality out of him, revealing that it was never truly a gift. Calder had only been carrying her power all these years, keeping it alive until she could reclaim the body. Max's form begins to collapse and twist, transforming into the Witch Queen herself. Now restored, she attacks Calder with a storm of magical insects. Calder fires back, but the Queen slips away into a tree and vanishes. Calder rushes back to the city and finds that the 36th stone has finally awakened from the curse. But he can't celebrate. He knows the Queen is going to unleash a new black plague, and without immortality, he's afraid he won't be able to stop her. The 36th stone reminds him that he defeated her once before and urges him not to give up, telling him he can do it again. Motivated by his old friend's faith in him, Calder prepares for war. He retrieves a legendary sword and gathers several powerful runes to arm himself properly, then leaves with Chloe and the 37th stone, heading toward the council chamber where the plague tree has been hidden away. When they arrive, they find Gleeza dead, confirming their worst fear. The Witch Queen is already there, and she's come to release the plague. They follow a hidden passage down into the caves beneath the council room, where imprisoned witches were once kept. Calder smashes through a wall and discovers Elle's body. Even in death, it's being used to chant the plague spell. Chloe enters Elle's mind to stop the chanting from within. Outside, the sentinel appears. Calder and the Don open fire on it, but the bullets are useless. It barely reacts. It knocks Calder aside, but he quickly gets back up, leaps onto the creature, and drives his sword into it, then shoots directly into its weak point, causing the monster to explode. Inside Elle's mind, Chloe approaches him to try to stop him, but Elle strikes first, jumping on her and forcing her down, trying to kill her before she can stop the spell. Chloe fights for her life, finally manages to push him back, and throws him into the root hole. The moment he falls in, the chanting stops and the plague spell is interrupted. As Chloe returns to the real world, Calder goes after the Witch Queen. She traps him inside a terrifying illusion, forcing him to fight in a ruined, post-apocalyptic version of the world. This time Calder is mortal, so every strike actually injures him. Each hit leaves real scars and wounds. Still, he refuses to back down. After a fierce exchange, Calder manages to stab the Queen, but the attack only breaks the illusion. Back in reality, Calder uses one of his runes to set his sword on fire, strikes the Witch Queen, and knocks her down again. For a moment it looks like he's finally about to finish her, but just as he prepares the killing blow, the 37th stone appears, holding Chloe at gunpoint. The truth comes out: the 37th stone is also a witch, though he was born without the ability to use magic. The witches Calder killed years ago are the ones who burned down his childhood home. They were actually his parents. His whole story had been twisted by revenge. He shoots Calder and hands Chloe over to the Witch Queen. The Queen immediately uses Chloe to begin the chant again, and this time the plague is released across the city. The 37th Don expects a reward. He believes the Queen will finally grant him magical power. But she has no respect for anyone without magic. To her, he's worthless, and she kills him with her swarm without hesitation. While Calder lies unconscious, he dreams of his family. Instead of pulling him deeper into grief, they give him strength, encouraging him to rise again and keep fighting, reminding him that his pain doesn't have to be the end of him. Calder wakes up and reaches for the weather rune he took earlier. He attaches its power to his sword, charging the weapon with lightning, then throws the electrified blade straight at the Witch Queen. The attack strikes true, destroying her completely and returning immortality to Calder. As his wounds heal, the plague spreading through the city disappears. The Queen's body collapses into ash, but her heart keeps beating. Calder raises his sword, ready to destroy it once and for all, even if it means ending his own life. But Chloe stops him. She tells him the world still needs him, there are still dangerous witches out there, and someone has to stand between them and innocent people. She also promises to guard the heart herself, so he never has to face eternity alone again. Sometime later, Calder meets with the 36th Don and tells him he's finished working for the organization. His loyalty to the Axe and Cross has come to an end. After that, he leaves with Chloe, and together they head off toward whatever threat waits for them next. You ever start watching a movie for one reason and then, halfway through, realize that reason barely even matters to the movie? That was pretty much my experience with The Last Witch Hunter. I went in partly because of Michael Caine, not entirely because of him, but enough that his name being attached made me more curious than I probably would have been otherwise. And pretty quickly you realize, okay, Caine is here, sure, but this isn't his movie. This isn't one of those watch it for Michael Caine situations. He's more like the classy decoration on a very loud supernatural action cake. The real center, obviously, is Vin Diesel. And that already sets a pretty specific expectation, because when you see Vin Diesel in a movie about an immortal witch hunter, you're not expecting delicate emotional drama. You're not expecting some quiet, elegant meditation on grief and eternal life. You're expecting gravel-voiced confidence, big fantasy nonsense, dark rooms, magical explosions, and probably at least one scene where Diesel looks at something impossible and reacts like he's mildly annoyed rather than terrified. Honestly, that's pretty much the lane this movie drives in. I didn't go into The Last Witch Hunter expecting a masterpiece, and I don't think most people did. The title alone tells you what kind of movie you're about to watch. Something you'd find on late-night cable, or put on when you want dark fantasy without having to think too much. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes a movie just needs to give you a cursed hero, some weird monsters, a secret magical world, and enough action to keep your eyes on the screen. The problem is that when expectations are already low, the movie still has to clear them in a fun way. And that's where things get interesting, because The Last Witch Hunter sits in a strange middle space. It's not instantly unbearable. It's not one of those movies where you know within 10 minutes that you've made a terrible decision. There are names in the cast that make you lean forward a little. Michael Caine gives it some old school credibility. Elijah Wood showing up makes you wonder if the movie might get weirder or darker than expected. Rose Leslie brings a bit of freshness, and Vin Diesel, whether you love him or not, has that movie star presence where you kind of understand why someone thought this could become a franchise. But at the same time, you can feel the warning signs early. This is one of those films that wants to be treated as a big supernatural adventure, but also doesn't want to be questioned too much. It wants to be dark, but not too dark. Serious, but not so serious that the silliness becomes embarrassing. Cool, but in that very mid-2010s studio blockbuster way, where everything feels designed with a sequel in mind before anyone made sure the first movie actually worked. So the best way to approach The Last Witch Hunter is with very specific expectations. Don't walk in looking for a bold new fantasy universe. Don't expect Vin Diesel's version of Riddick with witches. Don't expect Michael Caine to carry the whole thing. And definitely don't expect a horror movie that's actually going to disturb you. Go in expecting a casual, slightly ridiculous supernatural action film with some decent ideas, some questionable choices, and a cast that's honestly more interesting than the script sometimes deserves. Because that's where the movie has its best chance. As serious cinema, it struggles. As a franchise starter, it feels overconfident. But as a lazy night watcher, the kind of movie you throw on when you want Vin Diesel fighting witchcraft in modern New York, yeah, there's at least something there. Not magic exactly, but curiosity. Definitely. The movie opens with the kind of setup that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but also kind of cool. We're thrown back into the Middle Ages, where everything is grim, muddy, diseased, and basically one bad afternoon away from complete collapse. There's plague, death, frightened villagers, ancient evil, and a group of warriors marching into the darkness to kill the source of it all, the Witch Queen. At the center of that group is Calder, played by Vin Diesel. This opening is probably one of the more promising parts of the movie, because it immediately gives the story a larger, mythic feeling. It's not just some guy hunts witches, as the film wants us to understand that Calder's entire life was broken by this evil. The Witch Queen isn't presented as just another random monster. She's tied to plague, destruction, and personal loss. She represents the thing that took everything from him. So when Calder finally reaches her, it has the shape of a classic dark fantasy revenge scene. Their warrior confronts the ancient monster. The monster is defeated. The hero wins. Except, of course, he doesn't really win, because before the Witch Queen dies, she curses him with immortality. And that's the central hook of The Last Witch Hunter. Calder kills the queen, but her final act of revenge is making sure he can never die. His wife and daughter are already gone, and now he can never join them. He's locked out of death, locked out of peace, forced to keep living while the people he loved remain forever out of reach. That idea is actually stronger than the movie sometimes knows what to do with, because immortality in a film like this could easily be treated like a superpower, and to be fair, the movie does sometimes treat it that way. Calder can survive wounds, keep fighting, and walk through centuries like a supernatural action hero. But the real point of the curse is supposed to be emotional punishment. The Witch Queen doesn't just want him alive, she wants him trapped. It's a cruel idea, almost elegant, really, and also, if we are being honest, a little funny in hindsight, since cursing your killer with eternal life basically means you've created an unkillable witch hunter who can keep ruining witch plans for the next 800 years. As revenge strategies go, maybe not the smartest, but emotionally it gives the film a strong foundation. The tragedy is there. A man who should have died with his family instead becomes a permanent weapon. He wins the battle but loses the right to rest. He gets revenge but not release. That's a solid premise. The problem is not the setup, how the setup works. The problem is that the movie has to carry that pain into the modern story, and that's where it starts to wobble. In the opening, Calder feels like a man forged by loss. Once we jump ahead, he often feels more like Vin Diesel in a cool coat with a supernatural job description. Still, as basic premises go, The Last Witch Hunter has one with real potential. A medieval warrior kills the Witch Queen. She curses him to live forever. His grief becomes his prison, and his curse becomes his mission. That's enough to get you interested, maybe not enough to guarantee a great movie, but definitely enough to make you think. Okay, let's see where this goes. Alright, let's talk about the thing that makes Calder interesting and also kind of frustrating, his immortality. The guy lives forever, literally 800 years of hunting witches, walking through history, watching everyone he cares about die while he just keeps going. On paper, that's a goldmine for drama. Think about the pain, the loneliness, the weariness of living while everything else fades away. That's a dark, compelling character right there. And sometimes the movie nods at that. You get hints of his grief over losing his wife and daughter, moments where it's supposed to feel like the weight of eternity is on his shoulders. But then Vin Diesel happens, and suddenly Calder is less tortured and mortal and more cool guy who can't die and is really good at fighting witches. There's a tension there that the movie never fully resolves, because if your hero is unkillable, invincible, and largely emotionally unreadable, it's hard to feel stakes. You don't worry whether he's going to get hurt. You don't really connect with his pain. You just see him fighting, swinging axes, dodging magical attacks, looking mildly annoyed that something interrupted his night. And sure, it's funny, but it's surface level. Don't get me wrong, Diesel has the presence for this kind of action. He can look the part, carry the coat, throw out a one-liner, and make it look effortless. But Calder's curse is supposed to be tragic. The man is supposed to be exhausted by life itself, haunted by memories, carrying centuries of loss. The film tells us this is true, but we rarely feel it. That's what makes the immortality a double-edged sword. Conceptually it's brilliant, dramatically it's wasted. We're constantly reminded he can't die, can't rest, can't rejoin the people he lost. But emotionally, most of the time, we just see him being capable, confident, and invincible. The result is a character who's cool, yes, but distant. A superhero with a backstory that should make you ache for him, but instead you mostly just nod and wait for the next witch fight. You know he's supposed to be suffering, but the suffering isn't visible enough to punch through all the action and CGI. That, I think, is the heart of the problem with Calder's immortality in this movie, a brilliant idea that never fully lands. You can see glimpses of the tragedy, and you can imagine the epic story that could have been, but for most of the film, you're stuck with a guy who's unkillable, competent, and occasionally brooding. It's fun sometimes, but it's not tragic. Not really. Okay, now we jump from the muddy, plague-ridden Middle Ages straight into modern-day New York. And yes, New York again, because of course it is. Somehow every hidden magical world in movies finds its way into Manhattan skyscrapers. It makes sense logistically. Big city, lots of people, lots of hiding places. But it does strip away a bit of the original Gothic charm the opening promised. So Calder is wandering around this modern city, fighting witches who live secretly among humans. That's the fun part. The movie sets up this hidden world with rules, societies, secret bars, and magical laws. It's like a little shadow economy of witches, warlocks, and other supernatural oddballs quietly walking among us, plotting, scheming, maybe even brewing coffee while deciding whether to resurrect an evil queen. I like the idea. The film treats the supernatural as something that exists just out of sight, not really affecting the normal world, which is clever because it keeps the movie grounded enough for modern viewers. And yet it also means Calder's battles often feel oddly confined. Most of the magical threats feel like isolated incidents rather than world-shaking events. You rarely get the sense that the stakes are citywide or global, even though this is supposed to be an immortal warrior defending humanity. The hidden supernatural world does have style, though. Secret witch bars, dream-walking sequences, cursed relics, odd magical neighborhoods all give the city a layer of mystery. The problem is the film often gets distracted. 1 minute we're exploring a magical bar, the next we're in a random warehouse, then an apartment, then another chase through CGI-filled streets. The setting is rich, but the movie doesn't always know how to use it fully. Still, when it works, it's pretty fun. The contrast between Calder, this ancient immortal man, and the modern world adds humor, charm, and occasionally a little awe. Watching someone who's lived through centuries navigate Starbucks, taxicabs, and city cops is oddly satisfying. But the modern setting also highlights one of the film's weaknesses. The magic looks good, but it doesn't feel as dangerous as it should. Everything is filtered through CGI, which makes it flashy but occasionally hollow, and with Calder being basically unkillable, the hidden threats never feel particularly threatening. In short, the modern-day world gives the film a playground full of magical secrets, quirky rules, and hidden danger. It's imaginative and sometimes entertaining, but the city setting also underscores how limited the stakes are, how uneven the pacing can feel, and how much the film leans on Diesel's presence to keep us watching. It's a hidden world with potential, just one the movie only partially explores. Honestly, I kind of wish it had leaned into that more. Let us peek behind the curtain, let the magic and danger really thrive instead of just using it as a backdrop for Vin Diesel doing his usual thing. One of the more interesting ideas hiding inside The Last Witch Hunter is the organization called the Axe and Cross. Honestly, The name alone sounds like it belongs on the cover of a dark fantasy comic from the early 2000s, a dramatic, a little over the top, kind of silly, but also exactly the kind of thing this movie needs. Because if you're going to have an immortal Vin Diesel hunting witches for 800 years, of course there has to be some ancient secret order behind him, keeping records, making rules, and pretending any of this is normal. The Axe and Cross is basically the church-like institution that helps maintain balance between humans and witches. It's not just Calder running around New York doing whatever he wants, at least that's the idea. There's a system in place. Dangerous witches are judged, magical laws are enforced, the bad ones are imprisoned, and the peaceful ones are allowed to exist quietly among humans. That part is actually pretty cool, because it gives the movie a bigger structure. It suggests this hidden witch world has history, politics, law, punishment, and compromise. Not every witch is evil, and not every supernatural creature needs to be destroyed. There's a truce. And Calder isn't just a monster killer, he's more like the weapon standing between order and chaos. The problem is the film doesn't dig into any of that nearly enough. The Axe and Cross should feel massive, ancient, powerful, maybe even morally complicated. This is an organization that's apparently been dealing with witches for centuries, possibly shaping human history from the shadows. That could open up so many interesting questions. Who decides which witches are dangerous? How fair is this system? Is Calder truly protecting peace, or enforcing the church's version of it? Are witches living freely, or just being tolerated under threat? The movie brushes against those ideas but never really stops to explore them. When the story needs a new threat, another magical trick shows up. When the characters are stuck, suddenly there's a rule, an object, or an ability that moves them forward. That doesn't automatically ruin the movie, but it does make the world feel less believable. Fantasy needs rules, even when the rules are strange, maybe especially then. Here, the rules are everywhere, but they don't always feel solid. The movie tells us this world has structure, but the structure keeps bending whenever the plot needs help. So instead of feeling like a hidden supernatural society with deep history, it sometimes feels like the writers are inventing magic as they go. That's frustrating, because some of these ideas are genuinely cool. The witch bar has personality. Closed dream walking is a strong concept. The idea of magical prisons is worth exploring. The Axe and Cross could have been a fascinating organization. Even the balance between witches and humans has moral potential. Are witches being protected, controlled, or oppressed? Is Calder a peacekeeper, a soldier, or a weapon? The movie has all of that sitting right there, but it rarely slows down enough to dig into it. Instead, the lore becomes decoration, cool names, cool places, cool magical mechanics, but not enough emotional or dramatic weight underneath. It's world building with a lot of furniture, but not enough people actually living in the rooms. That's why the whole thing sometimes feels more like a video game setup than a movie world. You can almost imagine the side missions: visit the witch nightclub, track the cursed relic, fight the warlock, enter the dream level, unlock the memory, defeat the resurrected queen. As a game, that might honestly work beautifully. As a film, it needs to feel more connected. The strongest fantasy worlds don't just throw lore at you, they make the lore matter to the characters, make every rule feel like it costs something. In The Last Witch Hunter, the mythology is busy but not always meaningful. It gives the movie texture and scope, but it also clutters the story. So the witch lore is both one of the film's strengths and one of its biggest problems. It gives the movie flavor and suggests a larger world beyond the frame, but it also makes the story heavier, messier, and occasionally confusing. You can tell there was imagination behind it. You can feel the creators trying to build a dark fantasy universe that could support more stories. But in this first movie, the world building never fully settles. It keeps moving, explaining, expanding, adding, and after a while, You don't want another ruler, you just want the magic to feel real. One thing I noticed about The Last Witch Hunter is that the side characters are sometimes more interesting than the lead. A little embarrassing for Vin Diesel, but kind of fun to watch. Take the villains, for example. Beel the Warlock is supposed to be threatening. He looks the part, has power, presence, and a dark edge. And yet the film never really lets him breathe as a character. He exists to be an obstacle, something for Calder to swing weapons and magic at. You don't feel his motivations deeply, and honestly, most of the time he feels like a video game boss you just need to defeat. Then there's the Witch Queen herself, played by Julie Angela. Visually, she's striking. The design works, and she feels like the ancient evil she's meant to be. But her screen time is limited, and the narrative doesn't let her develop as a threat beyond the obvious revenge plot. She's iconic in appearance but shallow in personality. On the other side, you've got quirky magical contacts like Max, a blind pastry chef who doubles as a magician. Exactly the kind of oddball touch that should give the world flavor, and it does, but only in small doses. These characters pop in, deliver a piece of exposition or a magic trick, and then vanish, leaving you thinking, wait, did that just happen? Chloe, of course, deserves another mention here. She's a side character, yes, but one of the most grounded and charming presences in the film. She interacts with Calder, interprets magic, and drives a lot of the dream-walking sequences. Without her, the world feels even more clinical, more like a series of tasks than a lived-in universe. Even Joseph Gilgun pops up for a brief but memorable bit of eccentricity. He doesn't do much narratively, but his energy adds a flash of chaos that contrasts with the otherwise grim tone. Here's the thing. The supporting cast often carries more personality than the main plot allows. They make the hidden magical world feel real and give you little sparks of imagination, reminding you there's a lot happening beyond Calder swinging axes and shouting at enemies. But the movie doesn't always give them time. Most of these side characters exist for plot convenience, giving Calder information, demonstrating a magical concept, or moving him from one location to another. They're colorful, yes, but underdeveloped. You want to know more about them, want them to feel alive, and they mostly vanish once their function is done. So while the main villain and some of the contacts are underused, the side characters still add charm and texture to a movie that could otherwise feel very one-note. They're hints that, with more time or tighter world building, this could have been a lot more engaging. In short, the side characters are a mixed bag, some wasted, some fun, some weirdly memorable, but almost all of them more interesting than you might expect from a Vin Diesel-led fantasy blockbuster. And that says a lot about where this movie actually shines, not in the hero, but in the small, strange details of the world around him. Alright, let's talk about Vin Diesel. Because if you're watching The Last Witch Hunter, you're watching him, like it or not. He's the reason this movie exists. And honestly, it's a mixed bag. Diesel physically fits the role. He looks the part of an 800-year-old witch hunter, broad-shouldered, imposing, with that I've seen everything and nothing surprises me vibe. When he's swinging an axe, charging into battle, or just walking into a room like he owns it, he's magnetic. You believe this man could take down witches and dark magic without breaking a sweat. That's Vin Diesel at his core: presence, action, charisma. But the problem is Calder isn't just supposed to be strong, he's supposed to be haunted. He's supposed to carry centuries of grief, to feel the weight of losing his wife and daughter and being cursed to live forever. And Diesel, well, he doesn't really deliver that part. Not consistently. There are glimpses of grief and exhaustion in his eyes, rare moments where it seems like he's carrying the weight of immortality. But mostly, Calder is flat, distant, and let's be honest, a little too cool for school. The man who's lived for 8 centuries feels more like your favorite action hero dropped into a dark fantasy world than someone truly cursed by time. That's where the film hits its biggest tension with him. You're supposed to worry about him, to feel like maybe this time he could fail, like maybe this battle could matter emotionally. But when your hero is invincible, emotionally flat, and mostly delivering gravelly one-liners, that tension doesn't land. It's fun, sure, but it's surface-level fun. There's also that signature Diesel charm, the occasional joke, the "I'm too cool for this" vibe, the little side smirk, the glint in his eye, and honestly, some of those moments work. You can see why some viewers enjoy him in this role, even if the movie around him isn't perfect. It's classic Van Diesel, physicality, attitude, a sense of fun under the surface. But the deeper stuff, the sorrow, the isolation, the centuries of watching everyone he loves die, never really hits. He stays at arm's length. So how do you take all this? Van Diesel as Calder is entertaining, capable, and visually believable as an immortal warrior. If you're here for the action, the presence, the attitude, he delivers. But if you're looking for emotional depth, for someone who really feels the cost of eternal life, or for a Calder who haunts your imagination long after the credits, you're probably out of luck. He's a solid action hero in a fantasy setting. He's not tragic. He's not nuanced. But he's Van Diesel, and in a movie like this, sometimes that's enough to keep you watching. Calder is one of those characters who sounds more interesting in description than he sometimes feels on screen, and that's a shame, because the ingredients are there. He's an ancient warrior, cursed with eternal life, who lost his wife and daughter and has spent 800 years hunting witches while the rest of the world keeps changing around him. That's not a bad foundation, in fact, it's a pretty strong one. You can build a whole tragic fantasy hero out of that. The movie clearly wants Calder to feel like a man carrying history on his back. Not just another monster hunter with a weapon and a leather coat, but someone tired, haunted, maybe even a little broken, someone who's lived so long that victory doesn't really feel like victory anymore. But the version we get is much colder than that. Most of the time, Calder feels less like a man crushed by immortality and more like a guy who's simply gotten very comfortable with being impossible to kill. He walks into danger with confidence, speaks in that calm, gravelly way, and rarely looks truly shaken. Because of that, the curse doesn't always feel like a curse, it feels like a job perk with a sad backstory attached. That's where the character becomes frustrating. The film tells us he misses his family, tells us he carries pain, tells us immortality is a punishment. But cinema isn't just about being told something, we need to feel it in the way he moves, in his reactions, in the quiet moments where the mask slips. And Calder's mask barely slips. There are hints here and there, a look, a memory, a few lines about what he lost, but then he goes right back to being the untouchable fantasy action hero, cool coat, big weapon, no fear. It's entertaining in a simple way, but it keeps the character at a distance. The strange thing is, Calder's loneliness could have been the heart of the entire film. Imagine living for 8 centuries, having every relationship come with an expiration date, every friend gets older, every ally disappears, every don eventually has to be replaced. The world keeps modernizing, but your grief stays ancient. That's powerful. The movie brushes against that idea, especially through the dons and his connection to the past, but never really sits with it long enough. It's more interested in the next magical clue, the next villain, the next burst of CGI. So Calder becomes more of a functional hero than a deeply felt person. He has motivation but not enough vulnerability, a tragic past but not enough visible pain, a mythic setup but not enough emotional texture. That's why he ends up feeling oddly hollow, not useless, not boring exactly, but thinner than he should be. The character should feel like a walking wound. Instead, he often feels like a supernatural action figure placed inside a world that wants him to be tragic. To be fair, Calder still works on a basic entertainment level. If all you need is an immortal warrior hunting witches, he does the job. He has presence, a clear mission, and he looks right in the middle of all the dark fantasy chaos. But the movie keeps hinting at a deeper version of him that never fully arrives. That's the real disappointment. Calder isn't a bad character idea, he's actually a very good one. But the execution leaves him stuck between two versions. The haunted immortal the story needs, and the cool action hero the movie keeps giving us. By the end, you remember the concept more than the man. Now let's talk about Michael Caine, because in a movie like The Last Witch Hunter, he's the one who reminds you the cast actually matters. Caine plays the 36th Donne, Calder's handler, the priest who keeps records, the one who links him to the axe and cross. On paper, it's a supporting role, maybe even a small one. But as soon as he steps on screen, you notice the difference. The man brings presence, gravitas, and a sense of reality to what could otherwise feel like pure CGI chaos. He's the calm in the middle of all the witch explosions, the grounded voice in a world of curses, immortals, and dreamwalking. When he explains the rules, the stakes, or just recites a bit of magical history, you actually believe him. He's not flashy, not overacting, he just is. And that makes the fantasy world feel more solid. It's easy to see why some viewers came for Caine. He's reliable, and he elevates material simply by being in it. Even when the plot is messy or the exposition heavy-handed, he gives it weight. You can tell he's trying to do the job well, even if the script doesn't give him much room to play. And the movie is aware of that. Caine's Donne is the link between past and present, bridging Calder's centuries of hunting with the audience trying to understand what's happening. When he's attacked, when he retires, when the role passes to the 37th Donne, those are the moments the movie tries to make the story feel urgent, and Caine makes that urgency believable. There's also a subtle charm in watching him interact with Vin Diesel. Diesel's often aloof, stoic, larger-than-life presence is softened a little by Caine's measured, slightly wry professionalism. You get the sense that Calder may be the star, but the 36th Donne is the one quietly keeping the whole operation grounded. Honestly, a lot of the movie's credibility comes from Caine alone. Without him, the supernatural bureaucracy, the mystical rules, even some of the emotional stakes would feel far thinner. With him, the world feels like it has some structure, like there's someone who actually knows what he's doing. Of course, he's not given much screen time, and some moments feel like he's just there to deliver exposition, but that's Caine's gift. He can make even minimal material feel like it matters. He's steady, reliable, and utterly watchable. So yes, the 36th Donne is a supporting role, but Caine makes it the kind of supporting role that leaves an impression. You may forget the CGI battles, the villains, even the immortality curse, but you remember him. And in a movie like this, that counts for a lot. Elijah Wood showing up in The Last Witch Hunter is one of those casting choices that makes you pause for a second, not in a bad way. Exactly. More like, okay, interesting, what's he doing here? He plays the 37th Donne, the younger priest stepping into the role previously held by Michael Caine's character. On paper, that's a pretty strong position in the story. He's not just a random sidekick, he's becoming the new handler for an immortal witch hunter, inheriting a role tied to centuries of secret history, church authority, magical lore, and danger most normal people will never even know exists. That's a good setup. The problem is the movie doesn't give him enough weight. Elijah Wood has a naturally interesting screen presence. There's always something slightly nervous, observant, and intelligent about him, and that could have worked really well here. The 37th Donne should feel like someone stepping into shoes that are too big for him, dealing with pressure, fear, curiosity, maybe even doubt about the whole axe and cross system. But most of that stays in the background. Instead, he's mainly used as the new priest in the room, following Calder, providing information, reacting to supernatural danger, helping move the investigation forward. Functionally, he does his job, but emotionally the character doesn't really open up. That's frustrating, because the transition from the 36th Dawn to the 37th could have been one of the movie's better dramatic threads. Michael Caine's character has history with Calder. There's trust there, a rhythm, a sense of old friendship. Then Elijah Wood comes in as the replacement, and you can feel the movie trying to create that new partner energy, but it never fully develops. Calder should have to adjust to him, the new Dawn should have to prove himself, their relationship should have friction, maybe even some emotional awkwardness. After all, Calder is immortal. He's done this before, watched Dawns come and go. For him, this isn't just a staffing change, it's another reminder that everyone around him is temporary. That idea is sitting right there, and the film barely touches it. Wood isn't bad in the role, and that's worth saying. He's competent, fits the priestly look better than you might expect, and brings enough seriousness to keep the character from feeling completely disposable. But he's also underwritten, not given many memorable lines, not many strong emotional beats, not enough room to become a real counterweight to Calder. So he ends up feeling a little wasted. There are moments where you almost wonder if the movie cast Elijah Wood mainly because his presence brings a bit of genre credibility. His connection to fantasy and horror-adjacent material creates certain expectations, and seeing him in a supernatural film makes you think maybe he'll bring something strange or layered to the story. Instead, the role is mostly practical. He's there because the plot needs a 37th Dawn. That doesn't make him useless. He adds structure, gives Calder someone to talk to, helps represent the axe and cross after the 36th Dawn is removed from the main action. But for a character with such an interesting title and position, he feels surprisingly thin. That's the recurring issue with The Last Witch Hunter. It keeps introducing pieces that sound better than they play. The 37th Dawn should matter more. Elijah Wood should have more to do. The handoff between the old Dawn and the new one should carry emotional meaning. But the film is too busy chasing magical clues, villains, and franchise setup to let that relationship breathe. So Wood's performance is fine, the casting is interesting, and the concept behind his character is genuinely promising. But the 37th Dawn never becomes as memorable as he should be. He feels less like a fully developed character and more like another missed opportunity in a movie already full of them. Rose Leslie's Chloe is one of the few characters in The Last Witch Hunter who actually makes the movie feel a little less stiff, and I don't mean she completely fixes it. She doesn't. The script still gives her limited space, and the film still has a habit of reducing interesting people into plot tools. But whenever Chloe enters the story, there's a noticeable shift. The movie loosens up a bit. It becomes less about ancient organizations and Vin Diesel brooding through exposition, and more about someone who actually lives inside this hidden magical world that matters. Chloe is a witch, but she's not framed as some grand evil figure or mysterious ancient villain. She feels more grounded than that. She runs in the supernatural underground, has her own place, her own survival instincts, her own attitude toward Calder and his reputation as a witch hunter. She's not impressed the way everyone else seems expected to be, and honestly, that makes her refreshing. Rose Leslie brings a sharp, slightly guarded energy to the role. She doesn't overplay it, giving Chloe enough warmth to be likable but enough edge to keep her from becoming just the helpful magical sidekick. There's a bit of tension in how she interacts with Calder, since she belongs to the world he's spent centuries controlling, and that alone gives their scenes a little more bite than the movie often earns elsewhere. Her dream walking ability is easily one of the better ideas in the film. Instead of making her power just another flashy combat trick, the movie ties Chloe to memory, dreams, and buried truth, giving her a function beyond fighting. She becomes the person who can take Calder into the parts of himself he can't reach alone. In a better, more emotionally focused version of this movie, Chloe could have been the key to unlocking the whole tragedy of Calder's immortality. The movie almost gets there. There are moments where her presence points towards something more interesting, a story about trust between a witch and a witch hunter, about the hidden community that Dawns judge from the outside, about magic that's personal rather than just explosive. Her scenes have texture, and her connection to the witch world makes the setting feel less like a stack of rules and more like an actual place where people live. The witch bar scenes help with that too. They give the movie some flavor, some social atmosphere, a little weirdness. You get the sense there's a whole magical nightlife happening just under the surface of the city, and Chloe's our doorway into it. That's the kind of thing this film needed more of. There's also a small scene where Chloe defends herself from a threatening spirit, modest compared to the big CGI battles, but it has more personality than most of them. It's quiet, tense, visual, and clever. You understand what she's doing just by watching her do it, without anyone stopping to explain every detail. That scene makes Chloe feel capable in a way the script doesn't always manage elsewhere. Still, she's underused. There's no way around it. The film gives her enough to stand out but not enough to fully own her place in the story. Sometimes she feels like a genuinely interesting witch with her own perspective. Other times she slides into the usual side character job of helping the hero, explaining the magic, moving the plot forward. That's disappointing, because Rose Leslie has enough presence to make Chloe more than that. She brings charm, alertness, and a little spark to a movie that can get weighed down by its own mythology. She's not the deepest character in the world, but she feels more alive than a lot of the material around her. When she's on screen, the film becomes easier to watch. So no, Chloe isn't a fully realized character, but she's one of the better ingredients. She gives The Last Witch Hunter some attitude, some softness, some mystery, and a glimpse of the more interesting witch world story hiding underneath all the noise. The supporting cast in The Last Witch Hunter is honestly one of the more interesting parts of the movie, even when the film doesn't give them enough room to breathe. That's the weird thing here. You look at the cast list and think, okay, there's actually some talent in this. Michael Caine, Elijah Wood, Rose Leslie, Olafur Darri Olafsson, Julie Engelbrecht, Joseph Gilgun. These aren't background faces with nothing to offer. There are actors here who could have made this world feel strange, dangerous, funny, elegant, and unsettling. And every now and then, they do. Olafur Darri Olafsson, for example, brings real heaviness to Beale. He has that physical presence where he doesn't need to do much to seem threatening. He looks like someone who belongs in a darker, nastier version of this movie. When he shows up, the film gets a little more texture, a little more menace. The problem is, like a lot of the villains here, he's more of a shape than a fully developed character. He feels dangerous, yes, but the script doesn't let him become memorable the way he could have been. Julie Engelbrecht as the Witch Queen has a similar issue. Visually, she works. The design, the makeup, the whole ancient evil presence give the movie one of its stronger fantasy images, and you understand immediately why the film wants her to be this legendary threat. But as a character, there isn't much underneath. She's the big bad, the curse giver, the plague bringer, the figure everyone fears. Fine for the mythology, but it doesn't give her much personality beyond ancient witch queen who must be stopped. Joseph Gilgun brings a different kind of energy, and honestly, the film could have used more of it. He has a slightly offbeat, chaotic presence that cuts through the stiffness. Even in a brief role, he adds a flash of weirdness, exactly what a hidden witch world should have. A movie like this needs those odd little human details. Not everything has to be grim prophecy and glowing CGI. That's why the secondary characters matter so much. They make the world feel less empty. The problem is that most of them are used like tools. One character gives colder information. Another demonstrates a magical threat. Another shows up to look dangerous. Another exists just to connect the plot from one scene to the next. They add flavor, but the movie rarely stops long enough to let them become people. That's frustrating, because the supporting cast often hints at a more colorful version of the film, one where the witch society has more personality, where the villains have motives beyond revenge and resurrection, where side characters don't just appear, deliver their function, and vanish. You can feel the actors trying to bring something to the material. Michael Caine gives dignity. Rose Leslie gives spark. Elijah Wood gives a strange, quiet seriousness. Olaf or Dario laughs and gives menace. Julie Engelbrecht gives the Witch Queen a strong visual identity. Joseph Gilgun adds eccentricity. But the writing keeps most of them boxed in. So the supporting performances become both a strength and a reminder of wasted potential. They help the movie make scenes more watchable, give the supernatural world some variety, but they also make you realize how thin the story is, because these actors are often more interesting than the roles they've been handed. In a stronger version of The Last Witch Hunter, the secondary cast would have been The Secret Weapon. Other Witch World would have felt crowded with memorable faces, dangerous alliances, strange personalities, and conflicting loyalties. Here, we mostly get glimpses, good glimpses, sometimes, but still only glimpses. This is where The Last Witch Hunter really starts to show its cracks, because the idea itself isn't terrible, actually, it's pretty solid. An immortal warrior cursed by the Witch Queen, living through centuries, policing a hidden magical world in modern New York. That's not a bad pitch at all. You can hear that concept and immediately imagine a cooler, darker, stranger movie. But the script never quite turns the idea into a strong story. There's a lot going on, maybe too much. Calder's Curse, the Witch Queen's return, the attack on the 36th stone, the 37th stone stepping in, closed dream walking, magical laws, witch prisons, secret organizations, memory clues, old enemies, hidden truths. And after a while, it starts to feel less like a tightly built mystery and more like the movie is throwing fantasy terms at you and hoping they sound important. That's the problem. The plot is busy, but not always engaging. There are scenes where characters explain things that should feel fascinating, but the writing makes them feel like homework. Someone mentions a rule, then another rule, then a curse, then a loophole, then a piece of history, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, I understand the words, but why don't I care more? That's not because the world lacks potential, it's because the story doesn't give the mythology enough emotional weight. The movie wants Calder's immortality to feel tragic, wants the Witch Queen's return to feel terrifying, wants the hidden witch world to feel vast and dangerous. But the screenplay keeps rushing through the human side of those ideas. It gives us information, not always feeling plot mechanics, not always drama. Even the dialogue has that problem. A lot of it feels stiff, obvious, or a little too polished in that generic blockbuster way. Characters say what the scene needs them to say, but not always what real people or even interesting fantasy characters would actually say. There are one-liners here and there, and a few have some charm, but most of the dialogue is purely functional. It moves the scene forward without making it memorable. Then there's the structure. The movie plays like it wants to be a supernatural detective story, an action film, a gothic fantasy, a franchise origin, and an emotional tragedy all at once. That's a lot to balance. A better script could have made those pieces work together. Here, they mostly bump into each other. 1 minute we're dealing with grief and immortality, then we're chasing magical clues, then we're inside a dream, then we're getting another lore explanation, then something explodes, then the movie remembers it is a villain. It keeps moving, sure, but the movement doesn't always feel clean. The most frustrating part is that you can see the better version hiding underneath. The don'ts could have been used to explore Calder's loneliness. Clue could have made the witch world feel more morally complicated. The axe and cross could have raised questions about power, control, and whether this truce is actually fair. The Witch Queen could have felt like a real ancient evil instead of just a CGI boss waiting for the final act. Calder's mission feels personal because everything around him is already ruined. You understand why he hates this force. why killing the Queen matters. The setting is doing half the storytelling for the movie. Then we jump to modern New York. That's not automatically a bad idea. An immortal medieval warrior living in the present day, hunting witches through a modern city, should be fun. There's a strong contrast there. Old curse, new world, ancient magic hiding behind glass buildings and busy streets, secret witch societies tucked away under everyday life. On paper it works, but on screen the modern sections feel more ordinary. New York has been used so many times for this kind of hidden supernatural world story that the movie has to work harder to feel fresh. And The Last Witch Hunter doesn't always manage that. Once we leave the Middle Ages, some of the rough gothic personality fades away and the film becomes sleeker, cleaner, more digital, more familiar. You still get interesting bits. A close witch bar has flavor, some of the secret magical spaces are cool, and the idea of witches living quietly among humans gives the city a hidden layer. But the movie doesn't explore that layer deeply enough. It mostly uses New York as a backdrop for clues, exposition, and CGI fights. That's where the contrast hurts the film. The medieval opening feels like a world. The modern New York material often feels like a setting. There's a difference. In the past, everything seems shaped by fear and magic. In the present, the magic often feels pasted on top of a standard urban action movie. Calder walks through the city, talks to contacts, visits apartments, follows leads, fights supernatural enemies, and the whole thing moves along fine, but it rarely has the same atmosphere as the opening. That makes you wonder what the movie could have been if it had kept more of that early texture. Maybe the modern world needed to feel uglier, stranger, more haunted. Maybe New York should have been shown as a city full of old magic hiding in plain sight rather than just a place where the plot happens. Maybe the film needed more contrast between normal life and the witch world, so every hidden door felt like entering a different reality. Instead, after that promising medieval start, the movie settles into a more familiar rhythm. That doesn't ruin it completely. Other modern sections are still watchable, and Vin Diesel moving through secret witch society has its own pulpy appeal. But the opening gives the film a stronger identity than the rest of it can maintain. That's frustrating, because for a few minutes, The Last Witch Hunter feels like it might become a dark, mythic, plague-soaked fantasy adventure. Then it becomes a modern supernatural action movie in New York. Not terrible, just less interesting. You can feel The Last Witch Hunter trying very hard to become a franchise, and not subtly either. The movie has that whole Chapter 1 energy from the beginning. Ancient curse, immortal hero, secret organization, hidden supernatural society, magical rules, recurring priest handlers, a dream-walking ally, an ancient villain, unfinished mythology. It's all built like the starting point for something bigger. And honestly, you understand why. On paper, this world could support more stories. Calder has been alive for 800 years, which alone gives you endless flashbacks, old enemies, forgotten missions, different historical periods, and supernatural grudges waiting to resurface. The Axe and Cross could open up into a much larger organization. Clue could bring us deeper into witch society. The Don'ts could add emotional continuity. The whole setup is basically begging for sequels, spin-offs, maybe even a series. The problem is a franchise starter still has to work as a movie first, and that's where The Last Witch Hunter struggles. At times it feels more interested in setting up a universe than telling the strongest possible version of this one story. You can sense the machinery as the ending leaves the door open, and the mythology is arranged in a way that suggests future adventures. Calder is positioned as the kind of character who could keep returning, hunting new magical threats, uncovering deeper secrets, expanding the world. But by the time the credits roll, the real question isn't what happens next. It's more like, did this first one do enough to make me care? For some viewers, Maybe yes. If you enjoyed the basic idea Van Diesel as an immortal witch hunter moving through a hidden magical world, a sequel might not sound like the worst thing. There's potential here. A second movie could have leaned harder into horror, tightened the mythology, improved the villains, and explored the witch society in a more interesting way. But the first film doesn't make that future feel necessary. That's the issue. A strong franchise launch should make the world feel too big for one movie. The Last Witch Hunter makes the world feel too cluttered for one movie. There's a difference. Instead of leaving you hungry for more, it leaves you thinking about all the ideas that needed better development the first time around. You can also feel the Van Diesel factor here. This feels like a deliberate attempt to build another long-running action property around him. He has the presence for that kind of thing, and the concept is commercial enough. Witches, monsters, magic, secret orders, modern fantasy, big effects. It's easy to imagine the pitch meeting, but franchises aren't built from concepts alone. They need characters people want to revisit, villains who leave a mark, a world that feels alive, emotional hooks that carry beyond the spectacle. With this movie, all of that is only half-formed. The sequel setup at the end almost feels optimistic in a way the film hasn't fully earned. It suggests more mysteries, more battles, more witch-hunting adventures are coming. But because the movie itself is so uneven, that promise lands with a shrug instead of excitement. That's probably why the idea of a sequel feels so uncertain. Not because the concept couldn't work. It absolutely could. There's a fun dark fantasy series hiding somewhere in this material, but because this version doesn't sharpen the hook enough. It introduces the world, yes, but it doesn't make the audience desperate to return. So the franchise setup is clear, maybe too clear. The Last Witch Hunter wants to be the beginning of something big, but it ends up feeling more like a pilot episode with a blockbuster budget, interesting pieces, decent possibilities, a lead character designed for continuation, but not enough magic in the first outing to make the next chapter feel essential. The strange thing about The Last Witch Hunter is that you can almost feel the ambition behind it. This wasn't some tiny throwaway fantasy film that accidentally wandered into theaters. It had Van Diesel at the center, Michael Caine adding credibility, Elijah Wood and Rose Leslie in support, a big supernatural mythology, plenty of CGI, and a clear desire to launch something bigger. The whole thing feels designed as the beginning of another Van Diesel franchise, and that context matters, because at the time, Diesel was already strongly tied to major action properties. People knew him from Fast and Furious, from Riddick. He had that established tough guy screen image, gravel voice, physical presence, loyalty speeches, controlled intensity, and a larger-than-life confidence that works well when the right movie surrounds him. So you can understand the thinking: take Van Diesel, drop him into a dark fantasy world, give him an immortal warrior backstory, surround him with witches, curses, secret societies, and ancient evil, and maybe you have the next big supernatural action series. On paper it makes sense. But audiences and critics didn't exactly treat it like the birth of a beloved franchise. The reception was rough. A lot of people saw it as bland, derivative, and forgettable. Critics weren't impressed by the story, the writing, or the emotional depth. Some viewers enjoyed it as casual popcorn entertainment, sure. But the overall feeling was that the film simply didn't land strongly enough. It came out, made some noise, and faded pretty quickly. That fading matters, because franchise starters can't afford to be forgettable. A first film doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to leave people wanting more, a character you want to follow again, a world you want to revisit, or at least a villain or final scene that sticks in your head. The Last Witch Hunter has the shape of all that, but not the impact. For Van Diesel, it also feels like a slightly awkward career move. You can see why he might have wanted another action identity outside of cars and sci-fi anti-heroes, but Calder never became that iconic new character. He has the coat, the weapons, the curse, the tragic backstory, all the ingredients say, but he doesn't have the same memorable spark as Diesel's stronger roles. That's probably why some viewers saw the movie as a step back, not because Diesel couldn't carry a fantasy film in theory, but because this particular project didn't give him enough to work with, or, depending on who you ask, he didn't bring enough to the role himself. Either way, the result didn't strengthen his screen image, it mostly invited comparisons to roles where he'd already worked better. There's also that feeling that the movie wasted some of its cast. Michael Caine gives the film class but is underused. Elijah Wood is interesting casting, but the role is thin. Rose Leslie has energy and presence, but the script doesn't fully build around her. You can sense talented people standing inside a movie that never quite becomes worthy of them. And when a film has recognizable names, a big fantasy setup, and still ends up feeling forgettable, the disappointment hits harder. That's the larger story of The Last Witch Hunter. It wasn't just received as a flawed movie, but as a missed opportunity, a possible franchise that didn't generate enough excitement. A Vin Diesel vehicle that looked expensive and sounded marketable but didn't convince enough people that this world needed to continue. Honestly, that might be its most fitting legacy, not a disaster people passionately remember, not a cult classic that found its audience overnight, just a movie that arrived with franchise energy, got met with shrugs and criticism, and slipped into that strange category of films people rediscover later and go, oh yeah, that existed. For casual viewers, it might still work on a quiet night. But in terms of reception, box office conversation, and Vin Diesel's larger career, The Last Witch Hunter feels less like the start of a new legend and more like a reminder that star power alone can't build a franchise. The magic has to be the two. Okay, here's a fun thought. The Last Witch Hunter almost reads like a video game waiting to happen. Hear me out. Calder is an immortal warrior with centuries of experience, moving through a hidden supernatural world, hunting witches, battling powerful enemies, unlocking secrets, and discovering hidden lore. That's practically a blueprint for a third-person action RPG. You could imagine leveling up Calder, upgrading his weapons, learning new magical abilities, taking on boss witches, exploring both medieval ruins and modern New York, and slowly uncovering the mysteries of the axe and cross. The world already feels divided into zones, the creepy medieval backdrops, the hidden corners of modern cities, secret witch lairs, dark magical bars. You can picture maps, side quests, hidden collectibles, and environmental storytelling that hints at the history of witches, the don'ts, and Calder's long life. Even closed dream walking could be a gameplay mechanic. Think memory sequences where you solve puzzles, navigate illusions, and uncover vital clues. Beel and the Witch Queen could serve as epic boss fights. The magic, the weapons, the cursed immortality, it's all there. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if someone has already thought about it. The narrative structure is actually well suited to episodic challenges, and the action scenes, inconsistent as they are in the movie, could translate beautifully into dynamic combat systems. You'd have Calder fighting hordes of witches, countering spells, and surviving situations where death isn't permanent, which fits a game that plays with risk and skill rather than simple failure. Even the pacing issues of the film make sense in this context. In a video game, you can explore at your own speed. The lore dumps, the exposition, the dream sequences could all be interactive and engaging rather than lecture-like. Players could piece together the story as they progress, making the mythology part of the adventure instead of a burden. In short, while the movie struggles with tone, plot, and pacing, the universe it presents has undeniable potential as a video game. If someone made this into an RPG or action-adventure game, it could be a lot of fun, immersive, combat-heavy, with a dark magical aesthetic and a sprawling world to explore. So if nothing else, watching the movie makes you think, man, this could be a killer game. And honestly, that's maybe the most exciting thing about The Last Witch Hunter. Here's the thing, The more I think about The Last Witch Hunter, the more I feel like this story might have worked better as a TV series. Not necessarily a great one, but definitely a more natural fit. The movie has too much mythology for one film, but not enough emotional depth to make all that mythology land in under 2 hours. It throws witch laws, secret organizations, magical prisons, dream walking, ancient curses, stones, rogue witches, and resurrection plots at you like it's trying to unload a whole season's worth of ideas in one sitting. And that's exactly the problem. As a film, it feels crowded. As a series, that same material could breathe. Imagine each episode exploring a different corner of the witch world. One could focus on Rogue Witch breaking the truce. Another could dig into the Axe and Cross archives. Another could follow Chloe into the dream world. Another could show a past version of Calder in a different century, dealing with some old enemy who still has unfinished business with him. That sounds more interesting already. The Dones especially would benefit from a series format. In the movie, they're a cool idea that doesn't get enough space, but on television you could really explore what it means for generation after generation of priests to serve beside an immortal man. Now the emotional cost, the trust, the tension, the way Calder keeps outliving everyone who tries to guide him. That kind of slow burn sadness needs time. The Witch Society also feels like something that should be expanded gradually. The movie gives us glimpses of witch bars, magical rules, hidden communities, dangerous factions, but mostly uses them as background decoration. In a series, those details could become the main attraction. You could actually see how witches live, what they fear, what laws they follow, and whether Calder is really protecting peace or just enforcing someone else's version of order. That moral gray area could have made the whole thing stronger. And honestly, Calder himself might work better in smaller stories. In a movie, he has to be the franchise starting action hero, a big entrance, big threat, big final battle. But in a series, you could let him be quieter sometimes, stranger, more tired. You could let immortality feel repetitive, lonely, even boring in a painful way. One case at a time, one century at a time, the character might slowly become more human. That's the version I want to see, not just Vin Diesel walking through New York fighting CGI witches, but an immortal hunter stuck in a world he understands too well and too little at the same time. Of course, it would still need better writing. A TV format alone doesn't magically fix weak dialogue or bland villains. But the structure would help. It would give the mythology room to unfold instead of being dumped on the audience. Give the side characters time to matter, and make the hidden supernatural world feel lived in rather than briefly visited. Even the action could improve instead of trying to make every fight look like a final boss battle. A series could vary the rhythm, with some episodes horror-heavy, some detective stories, some fantasy adventure, some almost entirely character-driven. That variety would fit this universe better than one overstuffed blockbuster. Maybe that's why the movie feels so frustrating. It doesn't feel like a story with no potential. It feels like a pilot episode that got inflated into a theatrical release. You can see the pieces of a better long-form version scattered everywhere. Calder's past, Chloe's powers, the Axe and Cross, the Don'ts, the witch factions, the old grudges, the hidden magic beneath modern life. The movie rushes through them. A series could have lived inside them. So yeah, if The Last Witch Hunter ever gets a second life, I honestly think television would be the smarter direction. Not because the movie demands a sequel, but because the world it hints at is bigger, weirder, and more interesting than the film actually has time to show. At the end of the day, The Last Witch Hunter works best if you treat it for what it is, casual entertainment. It's not trying to be high art, not trying to reinvent the genre, not even really trying to scare you. What it does do is give you an 800-year-old immortal warrior, a hidden supernatural world, magical battles, and Vin Diesel swinging axes and delivering quips while buildings explode around him. That's a lot of fun if you switch off your critical brain for a little while, and honestly, the movie can be enjoyable that way. You don't need to think too hard, don't need to untangle complex plots or puzzle over inconsistent world building. You just sit back and watch Calder handle witches, deal with cursed enemies, get some exposition from the Dones, and occasionally get a little humor from Diesel or close playful moments. It's easy to see this movie working on a weekend night with friends, maybe with pizza or a beer. You'll get some decent action, some colorful CGI, some gothic visuals, a little horror atmosphere, and a world that looks interesting enough to hold your attention. You might even chuckle at some of the dialogue or enjoy watching Michael Caine deliver lines with gravitas amid all the chaos. The pacing is fast enough to keep you engaged. Scenes move along, fights pop up frequently, and there's always some spectacle to glance at. You're never really bored in the sense that nothing is happening, even if you do notice the story is a bit formulaic or the emotional stakes don't fully land. It's also forgiving in tone. Now the movie knows it's over the top 8 times and leans into that pulpy energy. It's not ashamed to be Vin Diesel swinging an axe through CGI witches while a secret magical war brews under New York City. It doesn't demand you take it seriously, which makes it easier to enjoy. So while The Last Witch Hunter has flaws, a predictable plot, derivative elements, uneven pacing, underused villains, it still delivers what you might actually want from a movie like this: distraction, action, and spectacle. If you go in expecting a masterpiece, you'll probably leave disappointed. But if you go in expecting a light supernatural action romp with some gothic flair, a few laughs, and Vin Diesel being his tough, charismatic self, it actually works. It's casual, it's fun, it's forgettable, and that's kind of its charm. In short, perfect for a lazy night on the couch, not for a deep dive into storytelling brilliance, but sometimes that's exactly what you want from a movie. Alright, let's wrap up the good stuff about The Last Witch Hunter, because there's actually more here than you might expect. First off, the cast. Vin Diesel brings his usual charisma, gruff, confident, a little cocky, but perfectly suited to Calder's immortal action hero persona. He may not be deep, but he's entertaining to watch, and he carries the movie through most of the spectacle. Michael Caine adds gravitas even with limited screen time. Elijah Wood and Rose Leslie bring charm and energy, helping fill in the gaps where the story doesn't give them much to work with, and secondary cast members like Olaf or Dario Lafson as Beale pop in brief but memorable ways. Visually, the movie has moments that are genuinely cool. The Middle Ages sequences are dark, gothic, and textured. The modern New York sections, while more familiar, still manage some stylish shots and hidden magical spaces. Close dream-walking sequences stand out as small but effective glimpses of atmosphere and tension, and in well-designed costumes and sets. And the film has a look that's at least consistently cinematic, even when the story is uneven. The action is another strength, big, flashy, and often fun. The battles are full of energy, Calder swinging axes, spells flying, buildings exploding, pure popcorn spectacle. Even if the fights are sometimes repetitive or overused, there's enough variety to keep your eyes entertained, and the movie doesn't take itself too seriously, which helps the action feel more playful than exhausting. The world building, while overstuffed, has promise. The witches, the axe and cross, the secret supernatural society, dream walking, cursed immortality, these are all ingredients that could support more stories or a bigger universe. Even if the film doesn't fully explore them, they give the movie texture and potential, which is a nice change from completely flat blockbusters. Finally, the casual entertainment factor is solid. This is a film that works best if you switch off your brain for a little while. It's not Oscar-level storytelling, but it's fun, pulpy, and visually engaging enough to hold your attention. For a one-time viewing, it delivers spectacle, a few laughs, some gothic flair, and the satisfaction of watching an immortal hero take on a hidden supernatural world. So yes, it's flawed, but the cast, visuals, action, and world building make it an easy watch, and they're the parts that actually stick with you after the credits roll. Alright, now let's get into where The Last Witch Hunter really stumbles, because there's plenty to talk about. The biggest issue is the story and script. The plot tries to do too much, throwing in centuries of backstory, witch lore, magical rules, secret societies, dream sequences, and multiple villains all at once. The problem isn't that it's complex, it's that it never feels coherent. So much exposition ends up feeling like a lecture. The characters explain things instead of acting in ways that make you care. You know what's happening, but you rarely feel why it matters. That ties into predictability. The movie follows a very familiar formula. Ancient evil is defeated, ancient evil returns. The immortal hero must stop it. Supporting allies help. Big final battle. It's comfortable, yes, but also a little boring. You can see the twists coming a mile away, and the villains, even the Witch Queen, never feel truly threatening, since Calder can heal from almost anything, making tension hard to generate. Tone is another weakness.